With all the games I have played via Game Wisdom, and studying from my books on game design, I have picked up a lot in terms of game design philosophy. For today's post, we are going back to basics and discussing how every video game made falls into one of two schools of design. Mechanical gameplay is best used when you want the player to experience a set event, or handle a specific challenge. Older forms of this design were featured heavily in early video games and arcade games. Classic games would frequently make use of event triggers and timers in order to make sure that everything would happen the same way every time. We have spoken about casual games in the past, and how they are examples of mechanical gameplay taken to the extreme. What we have not yet talked about is how this trend still exists in modern titles, albeit in smaller doses. Whenever you have a scripted event, a situation with a fixed outcome, or any time where the player's interaction does not matter, that would be an example of mechanical gameplay. Many AAA games today feature bombastic set pieces, such as the Tomb Raider and Uncharted series, where everything is happening around the player, and all they are doing is pressing forward and jumping. Titles that feature set puzzles would also be an example of mechanical gameplay. Be it puzzle games or puzzles in another genre, the key element here is that the design of the game only allows for one way to succeed, or having one best way that works every time. Anyone who has watched the speedrunners can see how classic games can be broken down by their set elements to find the best path through, due to the fixed nature of timers and patterns. Many classic games can be played with tool-assisted speedrun programs, or tests. There is nothing inherently good or bad about this kind of design. If you want the player to do something specific, or get a certain reaction out of them, mechanical gameplay allows the designer to control the game space and play. With that said, as more developers embrace roguelike design and replayability, we saw a second kind of gameplay appear. Games that introduce random elements cannot be 100% predicted, and it goes to the player to figure out how to react and adapt. Reactionary gameplay refers to titles that cannot be played the same way every time for different reasons. Maybe the game procedurally generates the game space, or all equipment is randomly given to the player, or enemies do not have the same fixed pattern. Whenever the game features elements that are not set in stone, the player will have to make judgment calls at a moment's notice. One of the best examples of this kind of gameplay is the evolution of the action genre with random pattern design. Action titles for the longest time featured fixed patterns, where bosses and enemies would do the same thing every time. This led to battles being mechanical, and in some cases, you could only beat the boss by doing one thing over and over again. Random pattern design means that the enemy decides what attack to use, based on their pool of attacks, defined by the developer. As the player, you may know what to expect, but you have no idea what attacks the enemy will use at any time. Recent hits like Souls-likes, Nioh, and most likely Sekiro Shadows Die Twice are perfect examples. The roguelike genre at its best can also fit here, as the player must be constantly reacting to every room, every item drop, and so on down the line. This is also the reason for the high replayability, as every run is a different experience to challenge the player. Reactionary gameplay is arguably a lot harder to balance compared to mechanical. As the developer, you do not have complete control over the experience. Some players may have an easy time, others may become frustrated. Giving up that control also makes it harder to focus on a set story and narrative, as the game is supposed to be something that can be replayed many times. Both have their place when it comes to designing a video game. But is one better than the other? Both mechanical and reactionary gameplay have their places in today's market, and it's better to figure out what your game is going to be as early as possible. Similar to our talks on action and abstracted gameplay, you need to be really careful when it comes to mixing gameplay types. Games that are meant to have replayable elements can be hurt if there are too many set experiences in them. Likewise, building your game around guiding the player through it, and then just throwing them to the wolves, may frustrate players who were not expecting it. An interesting combination of the two would be the JRPG genre. Many JRPGs feature very rigid stories and situations, but allow the player control over their party's builds, skills, etc. You still need to be careful, though, when it comes to balancing choices for encounters. A famous design track of the JRPG genre is giving the player all manner of status-affecting skills, but rendering them useless for any boss encounter. Conversely, we have seen CRPGs, RWPGs, focus more on letting the player have control over the story and gameplay at the same time. However, they still run into issues when there are set encounters or situations that the player may not have spec details. As we talked about when it comes to choice in video games, every choice must be balanced to provide a benefit in your title. If you are going to focus purely on mechanical gameplay, then you want to make things as polished and as refined as possible. As the player is not going to have any control over things, the risks of padding out a mechanical game are higher than a reactionary one. This is again due to the player not being able to impact things. For story-driven games, the player is willing to accept repetitive gameplay if the story continues to keep moving. But if it feels like nothing is changing, they may give up playing. Regardless of what kind of gameplay you are aiming for, you want to figure out these aspects as early into development as possible. As with the car gameplay loop, they will become the foundation for your title and from where all other decisions on the systems will stem from. For you reading this, can you think of games that were too mechanical in their approach, where the entire thing felt like you were going through the motions? Or can you think of a game that is too reactionary, where everything just seemed to be a chaotic mess? E.G. Zach Andrew Wilson claims Battlefield will let omit internal sales expectations due to poor marketing and unfortunate timing as a result of development delays. The Wii shooter sold 7.3 million units during Q3, around 1 million less than he had initially anticipated, and Wilson has lamented the fact that development changes pushed its launch into a more difficult window. Speaking during a recent earnings call, he also claimed that the decision to prioritize a single-player campaign over a Battle Royale mode, which will eventually launch in March 2019, 4 months after Battlefield V first hit shelves, also hurt sales. If I think about Battlefield V more holistically, I think we did not do a great job of building momentum early in the project, he commented. And I think about this not just in the context of development, but I think about this in the context of our broader execution. Against the entire campaign, our launch did not resonate as strongly as we would. We liked it to with players, and we were never truly able to catch up. Here's UGGESTEDTH games stalled, while competitors like Call of Duty, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Fortnite continued to gain momentum, leaving Battlefield fighting an uphill battle when it eventually landed on shelves. I think that we made the right decision to move the title in service of the quality of the game, and on balance, those that bought the game really enjoyed it, and the game was better for that move. continued Wilson. But the combination of a poor start in our marketing campaign together with what I think was a longer development cycle that put us into a more competitive window. You can hear more from the ECOB. Checking out the full earnings call transcript right here. Ubisoft announced that it's making changes to the controversial Assassin's Creed Odyssey DLC, which came under fire recently. This follows the apology Ubisoft issued last week regarding the DLC, which presented a mandatory in-game relationship rendering unromantic decisions the player made, whether to pursue relationships with men or women regardless of playing as Alexios, a Cassandra. No. The content of the DLC was initially going to remain unchanged, but an updated forum post seems to indicate a shift in direction. After hearing player feedback and discussing within the development team, we are making changes to a cutscene and some dialogue in Shadow Heritage to better reflect the nature of the relationship for players, selecting a non-romantic storyline. The post reads, "These changes, along with renaming a trophy achievement